Jack Morrison adjusted his black suit jacket one last time before stepping out of the transport shuttle. The fabric was perfect, pressed without a single wrinkle. His tie was straight, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. After 20 years as a diplomat, he knew that first impressions mattered. Today, more than any other day, he needed to look his best. The Galactic Council chambers stretched out before him like a massive cathedral made of crystal and metal. Ships from dozens of worlds floated around the space station called Nexus Prime. This was the center of galactic politics, where the 12 most powerful species decided the fate of billions of beings across the stars. Lisa Bennett walked beside him, carrying a briefcase full of documents. She had been his aide for 5 years and knew him well enough to see the tension in his shoulders. "You ready for this, sir?" she asked quietly. Jack nodded. "We've waited 30 years for this moment. Humanity deserves a seat at the table." He looked down at his suit again. "My grandfather wore a suit like this when he signed the first peace treaty with the aliens. My father wore one when he established the first human colony. Today I wear mine to make us full members of the council." The massive doors opened with a deep hum. Inside, the chamber was enormous. 12 platforms floated in a circle, each one designed for a different alien species. Some needed water, others needed different air mixtures. The platform in the center was for whoever was speaking. Jack's platform rose from the floor as he stepped onto it. Around him, the council members took their places. The Zenthari looked like living crystals, tall and sharp-edged. The Vreks were covered in scales and had 4 arms each. The Kreth were huge and muscular, built like walking tanks. There were others too, each stranger than the last. At the highest platform sat Council Speaker Thexvar, a Zenthari whose crystal skin sparkled, with different colors. His voice boomed through the chamber when he spoke. "The human delegation may begin." Jack cleared his throat and began. "Honored members of the Galactic Council, I come before you today representing all of humanity. For 30 years, we have served as probationary members of this great alliance. We have contributed to galactic peace, shared our scientific discoveries, and proven ourselves worthy partners." He gestured to Lisa, who activated a holographic display showing human achievements, space stations, medical advances, new technologies that had helped dozens of worlds. "We have fulfilled every requirement for full membership. We have earned our place among you." A low rumbling sound came from the Rex platform. It took Jack a moment to realize they were laughing. Council Speaker Thexvar's crystal body flashed with what looked like amusement. "Earned?" he said. "What? Have you primitive bipeds really earned?" Jack felt his stomach tighten but kept his voice steady. "We have contributed more to galactic science in 30 years than many species have in centuries. Our medical research has saved millions of lives across the galaxy." "Barely evolved mammals," muttered Councillor Grexith of the Vreks. "They think their simple achievements matter." "I beg your pardon," Jack said, his voice still professional. "Could you repeat that? I believe there was a translation error." But there was no error. Around the chamber, the council members began making comments to each other. They spoke in their own languages, but Jack's translator was working perfectly. He could hear every insult. "Look at its strange covering," said one. "Such an ugly creature," said another. "Why do we even allow them here?" asked a third. Jack's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice calm. "I believe we should focus on the matter at hand, humanity's application for full membership." "Silence," boomed Thexvar. "You will speak only when given permission." The chamber fell quiet. Jack looked around at the faces, staring down at him. He had negotiated with some of these beings for years. He thought he had earned their respect, but now he saw something different in their eyes. Not respect, not even indifference. Something much worse. "Your application is rejected," Thexvar announced. "Furthermore, we find your presence here today offensive." "Offensive?" Jack asked. "How have I offended anyone?" "Your clothing," said Councillor Rex of the Nautilian Collective. "That primitive garb you wear shows disrespect to civilized beings." Jack looked down at his suit. "This is formal diplomatic attire. It shows respect for this assembly and for the importance of today's proceedings." "It is native costume." Thexvar, declared. Barely civilized species dressed like wild animals. Remove it immediately. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as laughter. Dozens of different species, all making sounds of amusement at Jack's expense. He felt his face grow hot with embarrassment and anger. "I will not remove my clothing," Jack said, firmly. "This suit represents the dignity of my species and the formal nature of diplomatic proceedings." "Then you insult us all," Thexvar replied. Two massive Kreth warriors stepped onto Jack's platform. "Remove the natives' offensive garments." "This is outrageous," Jack protested. "I am a diplomat under the protection of council law." But Kreeth didn't care about council law. The first one grabbed Jack's jacket and tore it off his shoulders. The second one ripped away his tie. They left him standing there in his white shirt, his formal attire scattered on the floor like garbage. The Kree. Laughter grew louder. Jack bent down to pick up his jacket, but one of the Kreth kicked it away. The fine fabric slid across the smooth floor, wrinkled and dirty now. "The human delegation is dismissed," Thexvar announced. "Your membership application is indefinitely postponed. Perhaps in another century your species will learn proper respect." Jack's platform began to lower. He gathered his torn jacket and ruined tie, his hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, not from embarrassment, from something else entirely. Around him, the laughter continued. Lisa met him at the bottom of the platform. She had never seen him look like this before. His eyes were cold and calculating. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled. "Send a message to Earth," he said, straightening his torn shirt. "Priority Alpha encryption. Tell them Protocol 7 is now active." He looked back at the council chambers where the alien delegates were still laughing. "Tell them the gloves are off." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard whispers about Protocol 7 but never thought it would be used. "Sir, are you sure?" Jack picked up his jacket and shook the dust off it. The fabric was ruined, but he folded it carefully anyway. "They wanted to see what humans look like without our civilized facade," he said quietly. "Let's show them what we're really capable of when we take the gloves off." As they walked toward the exit, Jack's footsteps echoed in the corridor. Behind them, the laughter was finally fading. The council thought they had won something today. They thought they had put humanity in its place. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. 3 days after the humiliation at Nexus Prime, Jack Morrison sat in the secure briefing room deep beneath Earth's Global Defense Command. His torn suit jacket hung on the back of his chair, still wrinkled and dirty. He had refused to have it cleaned or repaired. Every scratch and tear was a reminder of what had happened. General Alex Carter leaned forward across the metal table. He and Jack had been friends since their academy days, but Carter had chosen the military path, while Jack became a diplomat. Now their paths were crossing again in ways neither had expected. "Tell me everything," Carter said. Jack's voice was steady as he described the events in the council chambers, how they had laughed at humanity, how they had called humans primitive animals, how they had torn his clothes off in front of the entire galaxy's leadership. "They broadcast it," Lisa Bennett added from her seat beside Jack. "The whole session was transmitted to every member world. Billions of beings across the galaxy watched a human diplomat get humiliated." Carter's jaw tightened. "So this wasn't just an insult to you personally?" "No," Jack said quietly. "It was a message to every species in the galaxy. They were showing everyone that humans can be treated like dirt, that we don't matter, that we're nothing more than animals they can push around." Dr. Susan Walsh entered, the room carrying a stack of files. She was the head of Human Intelligence Services, a woman who knew more about alien psychology than anyone else on Earth. Her face was grim as she set the files on the table. "I've been analyzing the situation," she said without sitting down. "This wasn't a spontaneous reaction. The Council planned this humiliation. They never intended to grant humanity full membership." "What do you mean?" Jack asked. "Think about it," Dr. Walsh continued. "For 30 years they've kept us as probationary members, just long enough to get access to our technology, our medical advances, our scientific discoveries. They've been using us." She opened one of the files and spread. out photographs and documents. Look at this pattern. The Delphines were probationary members for 40 years before the council decided they were unsuitable for advancement. The sectoids spent 60 years in probationary status before being classified as a minor species. Every time the council extracted what they wanted and then discarded these civilizations. General Carter studied the documents. How many species? 17 that we know of, Dr. Walsh replied. All of them were treated the same way. Probationary membership, extraction of resources and knowledge, then rejection, and sometimes enslavement. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. They never planned to accept us as equals. Never, Dr. Walsh confirmed. You were sent to that chamber to be humiliated, to show the galaxy that humans know their place, to break our spirit so we'd accept whatever scraps they chose to give us. General Carter stood up and walked to the large screen on the wall. With a few touches, it displayed a star map of human space. Dozens of worlds glowed blue, connected by shipping lanes and communication networks. Protocol 7 has been active for 6 hours, he said. Every human world is now under military coordination. Every colony, every space station, every mining operation. Jack looked surprised. I thought Protocol 7 was just a contingency plan. Carter smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. We've been preparing for this possibility for 20 years, Jack. While you were being a diplomat, we were being soldiers. We knew this day might come. The screen changed to show what looked like peaceful farming worlds and research stations. But as Carter touched different controls, the images revealed hidden truths. Underground factories on agricultural planets, weapons testing facilities disguised as research labs, massive construction projects in asteroid belts. New Montana looks like a farming world, Carter explained. It is a farming world, but it's also home to the largest shipyard outside of Earth's solar system. Europa Research Station has been developing new weapons for 15 years. The mining operations in the asteroid belt aren't just extracting metals. What are they building? Lisa asked. Something the galaxy has never seen before, Carter replied. Something that will make them very sorry they decided to humiliate humanity. Dr. Walsh activated another screen showing alien communication intercepts. It's already starting. My agents have been placed throughout Council space for decades, sleeper agents in their governments, their militaries, their economic systems. As of 6 hours ago, they all received activation orders. Jack stared at the intelligence reports flowing across the screen. Economic data, military positions, communication networks. How long have you been planning this? Since first contact, Carter said simply. The military learned a long time ago that in space, you're either the hunter or the prey. We decided humanity would be the hunter. The room's main screen switched to show news feeds from across the galaxy. Reports of system failures, communication breakdowns, economic problems. It looked random, but Jack was beginning to see the pattern. The Vrex banking system crashed this morning, Dr. Walsh reported. Complete economic collapse of their primary trade networks. The Xanthari military communications have been compromised. Their fleet commanders are receiving orders that make no sense. And this is just the beginning, Carter added. Jack, you went to that council chamber as a diplomat asking for respect. They chose to respond with humiliation. Now they're going to learn what happens when you humiliate humanity. Jack picked up his torn jacket and looked at it. The fine fabric his grandfather and father had worn with pride, now ruined by alien hands. What do you need from me? Keep being a diplomat, Carter said. But not for the council. There are other species out there, ones who have been wronged the same way we have. Build us a coalition. Dr. Walsh handed him a list of names and worlds. These species have all been victims of council oppression. The Delphins still remember their betrayal. The Wanderer clans have been fighting council expansion for decades. The sectoids hate their slavery. Jack studied the list. You want me to unite the galaxy's outcasts. I want you to unite everyone who has been stepped on by the council, Carter corrected. Everyone who has been told they don't matter. Everyone who has been humiliated. The screens around them continued showing reports from across the galaxy. Systems failing, networks crashing, carefully laid plans coming to fruition. 30 years of diplomatic contact had given humanity access to everything they needed to know about their enemies. Jack stood up and carefully put on his torn jacket. The fabric was wrinkled and stained, but he wore it like armor. They wanted to see what humans look like without our civilized facade. And now they're going to find out, Carter agreed. But Jack, remember something. When this is over, when the shooting stops, we still need to be the good guys. We're not doing this for revenge. No, Jack said, straightening his torn tie. We're doing this because somebody has to show the galaxy that bullies don't get to win. That species who ask for respect politely shouldn't be humiliated for trying. Lisa gathered her files and prepared to leave. Where do we start? Jack looked at the star map showing human space and beyond. We start by visiting every species the Council has wronged. We show them that they don't have to accept being treated like dirt. And we make sure the Council understands that they picked the wrong species to humiliate. As they left the briefing room, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. Long-range sensors had detected something moving toward human space. Large fleets moving fast. Council forces, Carter announced over the intercom. They're coming to put down what they think is a minor rebellion. Jack smiled for the first time since returning from Nexus Prime. Let them come. It's time they learned what humans are really capable of when someone tears our clothes off in public. The war was about to begin. Captain Ryan Brooks stood on the bridge of the HSS Shadow Dancer, watching the Council fleet approach New Terra. 200 ships filled the darkness of space, their hulls gleaming with the colors of a dozen different alien species. It was the largest military force the Council had ever assembled. Brooks adjusted his uniform and checked his watch. In 30 minutes, the Council fleet would be in weapons range of New Terra, humanity's largest colony world. Home to 8 million people, men, women, and children who had never done anything except try to build a better life among the stars. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster said from her station, the Council fleet is transmitting a message. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Kreshtar of the Zinthari Empire. His crystal body sparkled with arrogant confidence as he spoke. Human vessels, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Your recent terrorist attacks on Council, space will not be tolerated. Prepare to be boarded and your leaders arrested. Brooks looked around his bridge at the dozen other officers, all humans, all wearing crisp uniforms, all ready to show the galaxy what humanity could do when pushed too far. Open a channel, Brooks ordered. Admiral Kreshitar's image appeared again, this time looking directly at Brooks. I am Admiral Kreshitar of the Zinthari Imperial Fleet. Surrender now and your punishment will be less severe. Brooks stood up slowly. Behind him, Amy Foster activated a recording device. What happened next would be broadcast across the galaxy, just like Jack Morrison's humiliation had been. Admiral, Brooks said calmly, before we begin, I want to show you something. The screen split, showing both Brooks and a recording from the Council chambers 3 days earlier. Jack Morrison standing in his perfect suit, asking politely for respect. The Council members laughing, the Kreth warriors tearing his clothes off, the ambassador gathering his ruined jacket from the floor. You see that man? Brooks asked. That's Ambassador Jack Morrison, a career diplomat who spent 20 years trying to build bridges between our species. A man who believed in peace and cooperation. A man who asked for nothing more than basic respect. Admiral Kreshitar's crystal body flashed with impatience. Your point, human? My point, Brooks said, his voice growing colder, is that you insulted the wrong diplomat. The Council fleet was close enough now that Brooks could see individual ships, Zinthari crystal cruisers, Vrex battle carriers, Kreth assault ships, all of them designed to intimidate primitive species into submission. You have 30 seconds to surrender, Admiral Kreshitar declared. After that, we will take your world by force. Brooks looked at Amy Foster and nodded. Around New Terra, space began to shimmer. What had looked like empty void suddenly filled with ships. Not just a few ships, hundreds of ships, human vessels that had been hiding using technology the Council had never seen before. Counteroffer, Brooks said. You have 30 seconds to turn around and leave our space. After that, We'll show you what happens when you humiliate humanity. The Council fleet opened fire first. Energy beams and missiles streaked across space toward the human ships. But the human vessels didn't fight like any military force the Council had ever encountered. Instead of forming battle lines, the human ships split apart into smaller units. What looked like single vessels suddenly became 3 or 4 ships working together. They moved like a school of fish, impossible to target, impossible to predict. The Council's weapons, designed to fight traditional fleet battles, couldn't keep up with the human tactics. Brooks watched as his ships danced between the enemy fire, striking at weak points and disappearing before the Council forces could respond. "How are they doing this?" Admiral Crescitar demanded over the open channel. 20 years of preparation," Brooks replied. 20 years of studying your tactics, your technology, your weaknesses. 20 years of getting ready for the day you showed your true colors. The battle was turning into a massacre, but not the one the Council had expected. Human ships struck with precision and coordination that seemed impossible. Every shot counted. Every movement had a purpose. Within an hour, half the Council fleet was destroyed or disabled. But the real shock came when reports began flooding in from across Council space. Dr. Susan Walsh's sleeper agents had been busy. On the Vrex homeworld, the planetary defense grid had shut down completely. Government buildings were displaying images of Jack Morrison's humiliation, followed by messages demanding respect for humanity. The Xanthari Empire's military command center found itself locked out of its own computer systems. Instead of tactical displays, every screen showed the same thing: a human in a torn suit picking up his dignity from the floor. The Nautilian Collective's trade networks collapsed as their cargo ships received navigation instructions that sent them to human-controlled space instead of their intended destinations. The crews weren't harmed, but their cargo holds were emptied of anything useful to the human war effort. "This is impossible," Admiral Crescitar transmitted, his crystal body now flickering with what looked like fear. "How are you doing this?" Brooks smiled. 30 years of diplomatic contact. 30 years of your people thinking humans were harmless. 30 years of us learning everything we needed to know about you while you learned nothing about us. Amy Foster looked up from her console. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's Ambassador Morrison." The screen changed to show Jack Morrison standing in what looked like a conference room. He was wearing his torn suit, but he had added something new, a small pin on his lapel showing the Earth flag. His voice was calm and professional as he spoke. "People of the galaxy," Morrison said. 3 days ago, I went to the Galactic Council as a diplomat seeking respect for humanity. I was humiliated, stripped of my clothes and laughed at by beings who consider themselves civilized. The image shifted to show the council chambers, then back to Morrison. "I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge. This is about showing the galaxy that bullies don't get to win. That species who ask politely for respect shouldn't be humiliated for trying." Reports continued flowing in from across the galaxy. The Delphins had declared war on the Council and were attacking Xanthari shipping lanes. The sectoids had broken free from their forced labor camps and were broadcasting their own stories of Council oppression. The Wanderer clans were coordinating strikes against Council supply lines. "You see," Morrison continued, "the Council made a mistake. They thought they were just humiliating one human. But they were really humiliating everyone who has ever been stepped on by the powerful. Everyone who has ever been told they don't matter. Everyone who has ever been laughed at for asking for basic dignity." Admiral Crescitar's fleet was in full retreat now, but there was nowhere to run. Human ships appeared wherever they tried to go. The technology that had kept humanity's true capabilities hidden for decades was now being used to hunt down the retreating Council forces. "This is Admiral Crescitar to all Council forces," came the desperate transmission. "We are facing a galaxy-wide rebellion. Request immediate reinforcements to all sectors." But the reinforcements weren't coming. Across Council space, their military forces were dealing with system failures, sabotage, and coordinated attacks from species they had thought were under control. Brooks looked at the tactical display showing the scattered remains of what had been the Council's greatest fleet. "Message to Admiral Crescitar," he said. Tell your leaders that this is what happens when you tear the clothes off a human diplomat. Tell them that humanity remembers insults, and tell them that we're just getting started. The few surviving. Council ships jumped to hyperspace, running back to report their defeat. Behind them, New Terra remained safe and free. But across the galaxy, the real war was just beginning. Morrison's image appeared one more time on every screen in Council. Space. You wanted to see what humans look like without our civilized facade, he said quietly. Now you know. When you strip away our diplomacy, our politeness, our willingness to talk instead of fight, this is what you find. I hope it was worth it. The screen went dark, but the message was clear. The Council had awakened something they couldn't control, and it all started with one man in a suit who had asked politely for respect. Admiral Kate Harrison stood on the bridge of the HSS Vengeance, watching the burning remains of New Haven drift through space. The agricultural colony had been home to 2 million people, farmers, teachers, children playing in fields under an white, alien sun. Now it was nothing but debris and the echo of their last transmissions. They used a planet killer, reported Commander Danny Wright from his position at the weapons console. His Special Forces team had been preparing for a rescue mission when the Council weapon struck. Now there was nothing left to rescue. The message from the Council had been broadcast across the galaxy. This is what happens to rebels, Council Speaker Thexvar had announced. Surrender now or watch your worlds burn. But the Council had made a terrible mistake. They thought destroying New Haven would break humanity's spirit. Instead, it had done something much worse. It had shown every human in the galaxy exactly what they were fighting against. Ma'am, the communications officer called out, we're receiving reports from across human space. Every colony, every station, every ship is requesting permission to engage the enemy. Harrison looked at the tactical display showing the location of every human military unit in the galaxy. For 30 years, humanity had been patient. They had tried diplomacy, they had asked politely for respect. They had been willing to wait and work within the system. New Haven had ended all of that. Open a channel to all human forces, Harrison ordered. Her voice was calm, but everyone on the bridge could hear the cold fury beneath it. This is Admiral Harrison. New Haven is gone. 2 million of our people are dead. The Council has chosen to escalate this war beyond all civilized boundaries. She paused, looking at the image of Jack Morrison that was displayed on every screen, still wearing his torn suit, still holding his ruined jacket, still representing everything the Council had tried to destroy. Ambassador Morrison asked for respect, Harrison continued. He was humiliated for that request. Now our people are dead. The Council will learn what happens when you murder human civilians. All forces are authorized to engage with extreme prejudice. Show them what humanity looks like when we take the gloves off. The response was immediate. Across the galaxy, human ships began moving toward Council space with a coordination that seemed impossible. But this wasn't random violence. This was precision warfare designed to break the Council's ability to function. Colonel Danny Wright led the first strike. His team infiltrated the Zenthari capital world using technology that made them invisible to Council sensors. They didn't target civilians. They didn't destroy cities. Instead, they did something the Council found much more terrifying. Every screen in the Zenthari capital began showing the same thing. Jack Morrison standing in the Council chambers asking politely for respect. The laughter of the Council members. The humiliation of having his clothes torn off. Then the image switched to New Haven burning. This is what you get for disrespecting humans. Wright's voice echoed through the crystal spires of the Zenthari city. This is what you get for murdering our people. We are coming for you. The psychological effect was devastating. The Zenthari had always believed themselves superior to other species. But now they realized that humans had been walking among them for years, watching, learning, preparing. If humans could infiltrate their capital, what else could they do? The answer came when humanity revealed their secret weapon. The massive ships that had been built in the asteroid belts weren't just warships. They were mobile factories capable of stripping resources from entire star systems and converting them into more ships and weapons in real time. The first system to feel their power was the Vrex mining colony of Zerion. The Council had established it as a source of rare metals needed for their weapons. Within 6 hours of the human ships arriving, every useful resource had been stripped from the system and converted into more human vessels. But the humans didn't stop there. They left behind a monument on the dead world, a massive statue of Jack Morrison in his torn suit holding his ruined jacket. At the base was a simple message: respect is earned, disrespect has consequences. Council Speaker Thexvar called an emergency session. The remaining council members gathered in their crystal chamber, but now they were afraid. Reports were coming in from across their space. Human forces were systematically dismantling their infrastructure while leaving civilian populations unharmed. How are they doing this? Demanded Councillor Grexith of the Vrex. Their ships appear from nowhere, strike our military installations, and vanish before we can respond. They're using tactics we've never seen, reported General Vextar of the Kreth military. Our standard battle formations are useless against them. They fight like nothing we've encountered before. What the Council didn't understand was that humanity had been studying warfare for millennia. They had learned from every conflict, every victory, every defeat. While the Council had grown comfortable with their technological superiority, humans had been developing new ways to fight. The turning point came when the Aquan Federation switched sides. Their water worlds had been under Council control for decades, their breeding populations enslaved to produce workers for Council projects. When human forces liberated the Aquan worlds, the grateful population joined the rebellion. The Council told us we were nothing, transmitted Aquan leader Depth Singer. They used our children as slaves. The humans showed us we could fight back. Now we swim free. More species joined the rebellion. The silicon-based crystalline collective, tired of being treated as living computers. The gas giant dwellers, whose floating cities had been strip-mined for resources. The hive minds, whose collective consciousness had been disrupted by Council neural weapons. Jack Morrison continued his diplomatic efforts, but now from a position of absolute strength. He met with leaders of species across the galaxy, always wearing his torn suit as a reminder of what the Council had done. Join us, he told them, not for revenge, but for justice. Not to destroy, but to build something better. The Council has shown you what happens when power is used to humiliate the weak. We're showing you what happens when the weak decide they've had enough. The war reached its peak when human forces surrounded the Zenthari homeworld, but instead of attacking, they sent a message. Admiral Harrison herself appeared on every screen across the planet. People of Zenthar, she said, your leaders chose to humiliate a human diplomat. They chose to laugh at our request for respect. They chose to murder 2 million innocent people. This is the consequence of those choices. The orbital defense platforms around Zenthar began exploding one by one. Not from human weapons, but from sabotage. Dr. Walsh's agents had been placed everywhere waiting for this moment. We could destroy your world, Harrison continued. We could use the same planet-killer weapons you used on New Haven, but we won't. We're not you. We're better than you. Instead, we're going to show you what happens when you lose everything except your lives. The Zenthari military surrendered, without firing a shot. Their crystal cities went dark as human forces took control of their power systems. Their proud fleets found themselves unable to move as their navigation systems were compromised. But the most devastating blow came last. On every screen in the Zenthari homeworld, Jack Morrison appeared one final time. He was still wearing his torn suit, but now he had added something new. A small badge showing the flags of dozens of species who had joined the rebellion. You thought you were humiliating one human, Morrison said quietly. But you were really humiliating everyone who has ever been stepped on by the powerful. Everyone who has ever been told they don't matter. Everyone who has ever been laughed at for asking, for basic dignity. Behind him, the camera showed the burning remains of New Haven. This is what your arrogance cost. 2 million innocent lives. All because you couldn't show basic respect to a man in a suit who asked politely for equality. The image faded to show the symbol of the new Galactic Federation. Not the Council's symbol of dominance, but a circle of equals, species working together instead of some ruling over others. "The council is finished," Morrison announced. "The age of bullies is over. Now we build something better. Something where asking for respect doesn't get you humiliated. Something where differences are celebrated instead of mocked. Something where no one has to bow to anyone else." The war was effectively over. The council's military forces were defeated or had switched sides. Their economic systems had collapsed. Their political authority was gone. But the real victory wasn't military, it was moral. Across the galaxy, species who had been oppressed for centuries were standing up for themselves. The powerful were learning that their power had limits. The weak were discovering they weren't weak at all, and it all started with one man in a suit who asked politely for respect. Jack Morrison walked slowly through the empty halls of Nexus Prime. The great space station that had once been the center of galactic power was quiet now. The council chambers where he had been humiliated just 3 months ago stood abandoned, their crystal walls reflecting nothing but darkness. His footsteps echoed as he approached the central chamber. He was still wearing the same suit, though it had been carefully repaired now. Every tear had been mended, every stain removed, but he had kept one thing unchanged: a small rip in the jacket pocket where the Kreth warrior had grabbed him. Some wounds were meant to be remembered. Behind him walked representatives from 47 different species. All of them wore clothing similar to human diplomatic dress as a sign of respect and solidarity. The Delphins had adapted the style for their aquatic forms. The crystalline collective had grown their bodies to mimic the shape of formal wear. Even the gas-dwelling species had created light patterns that resembled human suits. They entered the chamber where the Galactic Council had once ruled. The 12 platforms that had held the old rulers were empty now. In their place, a circle of simple seats had been arranged on the main floor. No one higher than anyone else. No thrones. No platforms for the powerful. President Ellen Ross stepped forward to address the gathering. She had been elected as the first leader of the new Galactic Federation by representatives from every member species. Her voice was clear and strong as she spoke. "We gather here today not as conquerors but as builders," she began. 3 months ago, a human diplomat came to this chamber asking for respect. He was humiliated, stripped of his dignity, and laughed at by beings who thought themselves superior. The assembled representatives remained silent, but many of them had their own memories of council oppression. The Aquans remembered their enslaved children. The sectoids remembered their forced labor. The Wanderers remembered their scattered fleets. That humiliation became a symbol, President Ross continued, not just of what was done to humanity, but of what was done to all of us. Every species in this room has felt the Council's contempt. Every one of us has been told we don't matter. She gestured to Jack Morrison, who stepped forward but did not speak. His presence was enough. The man in the repaired suit who had started a galactic revolution simply by asking for basic respect. "Today we establish a new order," Ross announced. "The Galactic Federation will be built on principles the old council abandoned: equality among species, respect for all forms of life, the right of every civilization to determine its own path." The trials of the former council leaders had taken place over the past month. Some, like Council Speaker Thexvar, were found guilty of genocide and executed. Others received long prison sentences. A few were allowed to return to their homeworlds, as ordinary citizens, stripped of all power and authority. The Xanthari Empire and Vrex Confederation had been dissolved. Their military forces were disbanded or integrated into the new Federation Defense Corps. Their former subjects were granted independence or membership in the Federation as they chose. But the real change was deeper than political restructuring. Across the galaxy, species that had been oppressed for centuries were discovering their own strength. The hive minds were developing new forms of collective consciousness that couldn't be disrupted. The silicon species were creating art that amazed organic life forms. The gas dwellers were composing music in frequencies that touched souls across the spectrum of existence. "We've received applications for membership from 36 new species," reported Ambassador Pete Johnson, Morrison's successor in the diplomatic corps. He wore a suit identical to the one Morrison had worn on that fateful day. Species that were afraid to contact the old council are eager to join a government that treats everyone as equals. Morrison finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the chamber. I came here 3 months ago asking for humanity to be accepted as full members of the galactic community. I was told we weren't worthy, that we were primitive, that we were animals who didn't deserve respect. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had once been enemies and were now allies. They were wrong, not just about humanity, but about every species they looked down on. They thought power meant the right to humiliate others. They thought civilization meant having the biggest weapons and the loudest voice. Morrison touched the repaired tear in his jacket. They taught us something important that day. They showed us that asking politely for respect isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to be willing to fight for it. Sometimes you have to show bullies that their victims won't stay victims forever. The new Federation's first major decision was about justice, not revenge, but justice. The worlds that had been strip-mined by the Council were given resources to rebuild. The species that had been enslaved were granted reparations. The civilizations that had been scattered were helped to reunite. Dr. Susan Walsh reported on the transition. Council military forces have been integrated into the Federation Defense Corps under new leadership. Former oppressor species are working alongside their former victims to build something better. It's not perfect, and there are still tensions, but it's working. The most powerful symbol of the new order was the memorial built where New Haven had once orbited its star. A massive structure visible from space, it showed the faces of the 2 million civilians who had died in the Council's final act of desperation. At the center stood a statue of Jack Morrison in his torn suit. But he wasn't alone. Figures representing every oppressed species stood with him, all wearing the clothing of their own cultures adapted to show dignity and respect. The inscription was simple. They thought they were humiliating one diplomat. They awakened a galaxy. As the formal ceremony concluded, Morrison found himself alone in the chamber for a few minutes. He stood where he had stood 3 months ago, but everything was different now. The laughter was gone. The mockery was silenced. The arrogant voices that had called humanity primitive were speaking in respectful tones or not speaking at all. President Ross joined him. "Any regrets?" she asked. Morrison considered the question. 2 million people had died. Entire fleets had been destroyed. The old order had been swept away in a tide of violence and revolution. But across the galaxy, children of dozens of species were growing up free. Former slaves were learning to make their own choices. Oppressed civilizations were discovering their own voices. "No," he said finally. They had a choice. They could have shown respect to a man in a suit who asked politely for equality. Instead, they chose humiliation. They chose to laugh at dignity. They chose to strip away everything that makes civilization worth having. He adjusted his jacket, the repaired fabric falling perfectly into place. They forgot something important. When you humiliate someone who's trying to be civilized, you don't make them less civilized. You make them realize that civilization has to be defended, and sometimes the defense isn't pretty. Years later, when young diplomats from the Federation visited other galaxies, they always dressed in formal suits similar to Morrison's. It became known as the uniform of respect. When alien civilizations asked about the tradition, Federation diplomats would tell them the story of the man who asked politely for dignity and was humiliated for it. The story always ended the same way. That's why we dress this way, to honor the memory of civilized behavior, and to remind everyone that when you disrespect someone who's trying to be civil, you might discover what they're like when they stop trying. Morrison retired to a quiet world on the Federation's edge, where he grew flowers and read books about the old Earth. But his suit still hung in his closet, cleaned and pressed, ready for the day it might be needed again, because the galaxy had learned an important lesson. Never humiliate someone in a suit who's asking politely for respect. You might not like what happens when they take the gloves off. The age of bullies was over. The age of equals had begun. And it all started with one man who refused to accept that asking for dignity was something to be ashamed of.